And you can probably already tell what we're gonna do next, because you know how much I love tasting history with Max Miller. Yeah. What is this one? Yes. The Pastry War. When France invaded Mexico over pastry. Color me intrigued. Let's go.
Everybody's heard of the Civil War and the Revolutionary War and the Korean War, but what about the Pastry War?
The what?
When in 1838, the French invaded Mexico over the loss of some baked goods. Baked goods like these 19th century puits d'amour, or wells of love. So thank you to Wild Grain for sponsoring this video as we prepare
Sounds
for
properly
war.
French, right?
Pastry War. This time on Tasting History.
Okay then. Swirlix and Slurpuff. Oh, good eyes, Tapper. Let's go.
In the 1820s and 1830s, in the early years of the Republic of Mexico, the country was in a constant state of political and social turmoil, and the government was often unable or unwilling to protect its citizens and those of other countries who were living in Mexico. So when the pastry shop of a Monsieur Remontel was ransacked by Mexican soldiers in the 1830s, he was forced to look to the French king, who after some failed negotiations with the president of Mexico, invaded the country in an effort to get reparations for Monsieur Remontel's pastries, along with other debts owed. It was a short war, but it really set the stage for Mexico's political machinations for the next 80 years. As for Monsieur Remontel's pastries, unfortunately there is no list of exactly what he was making at the time, but that gives me license to look through cookbooks from the period and decide on a recipe worth trying, and I figured I would do one from this 1840 cookbook Le Cuisinier Royal, or the Royal Cook, which has a recipe for puits d'amour, or well of love. It says, when the puff pastry has received all its turns, roll it out to a thickness of 2 lines. Cut it with a fluted cutter, that is to say, with a pastry cutter, and place the first piece on a baking sheet. Then, with a cutter of the same type, but smaller, cut another piece and place it on top. Moisten the round with a little water, press it in slightly, brush these puits with egg, and put them into a hot oven. When they are 3/4 baked, sprinkle them with sugar in order to glaze them, that is, until the sugar melts. Then remove them, hollow them out, and fill them with whatever preserves you judge appropriate.
Okay, that sounds tasty as hell.
So for this recipe, what you'll need is 1 egg for an egg wash, a few tablespoons of sugar for a glaze, and of course, some puff pastry. Now you can of course make your own puff pastry, but since this recipe starts out assuming that you already have the pastry available, I don't think you should feel guilty if you want to use store-bought.
Look, as somebody who's had to make puff pastry by hand, chat, I can very well tell you, don't. Just don't. Just use the store-bought frozen stuff. It's fine. You do not need to go all out and make puff pastry by hand. It is a feat not worth replicating. It is too many goddamn steps. Don't bother.
Puff pastry, and that is what I am doing, partly because I really hurt my wrist a few months back and it makes it so using a rolling pin is kind of difficult, especially for a long time, and more so it's because I would not wish making puff pastry at home on my worst enemy. It is finicky, it is extremely time consuming,
Thank you, Max.
and you don't know if you actually did it correctly until it is baking, and guess what? You probably didn't do it correctly. So just go ahead and buy your puff pastry unless you want to spend all day chilling butter and rolling out dough. This is one of those baked goods that, while delicious, is not feasible for most people to just make at home because it takes so long. Other things like croissant and sourdough bread are the same, and that is where today's sponsor, Wild Grain, comes in.
Don't need
Wild
to
Grain
make,
is the easiest way
absolutely
to turn
do
your
not
home
need to make
into
puff pastry
a
by
bakery.
hand, not when store-bought exists. You're fine.
Now let's get to making this pastry.
You're fine.
So start by getting 2 pastry cutters, one slightly smaller than the other, and then you need to decide on how many pastries you're going to make,
out where my pastry
and really
cutters
that
are.
just is determined by how much puff pastry you have. I am going to make 8, which means I need 16 rounds. Basically, you need twice as many as pastries you're going to make. So cut out 16 pieces of pastry, and then set half of those onto a lined baking sheet, and then take the other half and cut out the center using the second smaller cutter. Now the recipe says that these 2 pieces of pastry will stick with just some water, and they will, but I have tried that before, and if the pastry does not rise very evenly, and it very rarely does, the pastry will just slide right off. So I prefer to use a little bit of egg to make them stick together.
Eggy.
So brush a little on the bottom layer of the pastry, and then set the pastry ring on top and line the two pieces up. And repeat this until you have gone through all of the pastry.
That'll make it stick
many modern
way
recipes
better.
for these or vol au vent, which are very similar, will actually use yet another ring of pastry on top to make a really deep well. If you are going to fill these with like chantilly cream or crème pâtissière, make it deep, delicious. But since we're filling these just with jam, I don't think you want it that deep, otherwise you're just going to get a big old mouthful of jam, so one ring will do. Now the best practice is to chill the pastry while you preheat the oven to 425 degrees Fahrenheit, 220 Celsius, and then take the pastry out of the fridge and give the top a light egg wash and set them in the oven and bake for 12 minutes. And this is where I feel like the recipe really differs from a modern version, because it says that partway through the baking, so after about 12 minutes, you want to take this out of the oven and sprinkle the top with a little sugar just before setting it back in the oven for another 5 to 7 minutes. Ideally, the sugar will melt on top and give it a nice glaze, which I've never seen in a modern recipe for these at least. Unfortunately, my oven, it turns out, is not evenly distributed. No oven ever is. So half of them melted, half of them did not. I should have flipped it halfway through, but I didn't. Doesn't really matter though.
It's fine.
So once they've baked enough, then take them out and let them cool before you fill them with preserves. Now, I looked through French cookbooks from this period, the 1830s and 40s, and they had preserves made from pretty much every fruit and berry you could possibly think of. So use whatever you want. I decided on apricot. Unfortunately, it turns out it's not apricot season, so I had to buy it. And raspberries, and I was able to find raspberries, so I'm going to make those preserves from scratch. So for that, what you'll need is 2.5 cups or 300 grams of raspberries, or really any berry or fruit. And then
Chad, you should know me by now. You know exactly what kind of fruit I would be using in this. Mangoes. Abso-fucking-lutely would be mangoes.
and 1.5 cups or 300 grams of sugar, along with 2 teaspoons of fresh lemon juice. So first, mash the berries in a saucepan and then set it over medium heat. And once it starts steaming, you can add in the sugar and give it a good stir and let that start to steam, and then you can add in the lemon juice. Stir it all together and let it come to a boil. Give it a stir every once in a while, but generally just let it boil for about 10 minutes
just let it go.
or until it gets to around 220 degrees Fahrenheit, 105 Celsius. Then take it off the heat and let it cool completely as we take a look at how French pastry, like the ones that we're making today, started a war that upended Mexican history.
History time, chat. Buckle up.
In 1821, after 300 years of Spanish rule, Mexico earned its independence, and after a short dabble with their own monarchy, the country became a republic in 1824 under the first president, Guadalupe Victoria. Unfortunately, while the Spanish had been ousted, the country remained fragmented and was in a state of political upheaval for most of the next few decades. Victoria, who was the first president, was also the last president to serve out his full term for 30 years. Well, this kind of political environment led to civil disorder and inadequate policing, which often led to violence and looting of private property. One of the most egregious of these occasions took place on December 4th, 1828, in a district of Mexico City known as the Parian. It was a cluster of luxury shops largely owned by the city's French population. And according to one of those charged with restoring order, numerous groups of insolent plebs forced the doors open of the Parian, and then began sacking the building or bazaar, which for more than a century was the emporium of commerce. Throughout that disgraceful day and all of the night, they stole without intermission and committed abominable crimes, including murders in cold blood, to dispute both valuable articles and trinkets that passed from the hands of one thief to another. Not a single shop was spared, and when the shop owners petitioned the Mexican government for help, their pleas seem to have fallen on deaf ears.
That's
and really,
unfortunate.
this was just one of the more egregious occasions, but there were many instances of violence and looting very often against the French population in Mexico at the time. Several years later, a smaller but perhaps more consequential incident took place when the Mexican soldiers of General and 11 times President Antonio Lopez de Santa Anna looted the pastry shop of one Monsieur Remontel. They ate his pastry, drank his wine, stole his silverware, and destroyed his shop. And so Monsieur Remontel petitioned the Mexican government for 800 pesos to replace all that he had lost. But just like those of the massacre at the Parian some years earlier, his petition fell on deaf ears. It came to naught.
Well,
so after several years of trying, in 1838, he finally wrote a letter to the King of France, Louis Philippe, asking for help, by which time his request of payment, at least according to the Mexican newspapers of the day, had grown to either 30,000 or 60,000 pesos, much more than the original 800. Well, typically, you wouldn't think that the King of France would really worry himself about the complaints of a pastry chef who lived thousands of miles away.
You'd think that.
It seems that Monsieur Remontel's letter was simply the croissant that broke the camel's back. Because after years of petitions from other French nationals and a great sum of money...
God damn it, Max. The croissant that broke the camel's back. Really, bud? That's a joke I would make.
Ode to the French that had been borrowed by the Mexican government during the Texas Revolution, which ended in the creation of the Republic of Texas, France decided to reach out to the Mexican government and demand 600,000 pesos. And the Mexican government said, Nah. So the French king ordered a fleet under Rear Admiral Charles Baudin to establish a blockade of all Mexican ports along the Gulf of Mexico and to bombard the fortress of San Juan de Ulua, and thus on November 27th, 1838, the Battle of Veracruz began when three French frigates, along with 2 bomb catches, opened fire on the supposedly impenetrable fort of San Juan de Ulua. Baudin later wrote, "Never before had I seen a more nourished and well-directed fire. I had no other worry than to moderate its ardor. From time to time, Mexico. I signaled a ceasefire to let the smoke that hid the fortress dissipate. We then corrected the pointing, and fire would begin again with a renewed vivacity. During the bombardment, 2 powder depots within the fort were hit and caused explosions which led to the collapse of the fort's signal tower, and by the end of the day, the Mexican fort had surrendered. Well, by all accounts, the Mexican government was shocked that this had happened so quickly, and so they swiftly declared war on France, expelled all French nationals from the country, and raised an army of 3,200 men and sent them to Veracruz, where they would be placed under the generals Mariano Arista and Santa Anna.
Wow, that's hilarious. A slight over a pastry legitimately started a war. Wow. This is literally the most French thing to ever happen. What the fuck? Translation from Ye Olde Speed. The gunners were so accurate, I only had to make sure they weren't getting too enthusiastic. That's fucking funny.
Now, Santa Anna had been living in retirement after his reputation was destroyed after losing the war for Texas independence. So this was really his chance at redemption. Now, Admiral Baudin, the French admiral, he was shocked when very quickly an army came into Veracruz because he expected that the loss of the fortress would renew some negotiations with the Mexican government. But his shock quickly turned to action, and he sent in squadrons to take the city. And he did. 2 columns ascended the city walls, and a third stormed the gates of the city and attacked the buildings where the Mexican generals were stationed. There they captured General Arista, but Santa Anna had escaped only to return with a unit of Mexican troops who formed a counterattack. Valiantly, Santa Anna himself led his men against the French, and valiantly many of them died, with grape shot being shot from cannons by the French. It just cut through the Mexican.
Oh no, grape shot. Yeah, no, that'll do it. Fucking yikes. Grape shot is nasty business, chat. Grape shot is nasty business. It's, literally like cannon-sized buckshot. Oh my god. Behold, the mega shotgun. Yeah, exactly. Foo-wah.
Ranks, and 31 were killed, 26 were wounded, including Santa Anna, who got shot in the leg and ended up having to have the leg amputated.
Oh.
Now the war, which technically lasted until March, ended with the Mexican government agreeing to pay France the 600,000 pesos, which they never did. And that lack of payment ended up some years later, about 20 years later or so, becoming one of the things that caused a much longer and much bloodier war between France and Mexico. This was the war that includes the Battle of Puebla, which is the origin of the holiday Cinco de Mayo.
Yeah, the origin of Cinco. That's so crazy. So that the origin of Cinco de Mayo, chat, it's just so funny to me. The origin of Cinco de Mayo is literally directly tied to a slight that involved a pastry worker in Mexico. That's so fucking funny to me. Holy shit. Hi, Earthly. What's going on, homie?
Now, as for Santa Anna's leg, that has a story of its own.
What?
Because after losing it, he had it buried and used the story of his valiant counterattack, even though it didn't work, against the French as a way to stir up political fervor, and it got him elected to president for, I believe, the 5th or 6th time out of 11 times he was president. But he wasn't very good at being president, because even though he was there 11 times, his entire tenure was only like 6 years or so.
That's crazy.
Some of the times he was only president for like a few weeks and then he was gone. Somebody else came in. Kind of a crazy time in Mexican presidential history.
That is insane.
Now, during one of his times as president in 1842, he actually had the leg dug up from Veracruz and paraded it all the way to Mexico City, where he had it buried again, but this time it was with a full military funeral with speeches and music and all sorts of things. And then shortly after that, when he was no longer popular, some rebels came in and dug up the leg and tied a rope on it and dragged it through the city of Mexico City. The streets of Mexico City, and then they ousted him from power, and he actually had to flee the country until he was called back in 1846 to be a general during the Mexican-American War. Well, by this time, the amputated leg seems to have vanished, but now he had a prosthetic leg made of wood and cork, and that was what he was wearing at the Battle of Cerro Gordo in 1847. But it must have been rather uncomfortable, because as the battle raged on, he decided to have lunch in his carriage, and while doing so, he removed his leg. Well, when the Illinois Volunteer Infantry found him and attacked his position, he was lucky enough to escape with his life, fleeing on horseback. But his leg, his prosthetic leg, was not so lucky, and it was actually captured by the Illinois infantry, and there is a wonderful drawing of the battle where you can see someone waving this captured prosthetic leg in victory.
Wow. Okay, that's funny. That's genuinely kind of funny. Just that image right there. Holy shit, that's fucking hilarious. What the heck? That one dude, I got the general's leg! This guy can't catch a break. No, he really can't.
The leg actually ended up back in the United States and was possibly part of P.T. Barnum's museum for a few years before it went back to Illinois, where, despite requests for its return by the Mexican government, the leg remains in the Illinois State Military Museum.
Okay, that is a level of petty that's incredibly admirable. Imagine getting multiple requests from the Mexican government, and it's just like, hey, can we get Santa Anna's leg back? And just the not even the government of the United States, just the government of Illinois is like, nah, that's ours now. No take back seat. It was captured fair and square. Just like us Aussies with Mephisto. No takebacks. It's ours now.
A true spoil of war. So I think there are a few lessons that can be learned from this story. First, don't take off your amputated leg during a battle.
Nope.
Second, don't ever try to become president of Mexico during the mid-19th century. It just ain't gonna stick. And third, don't ever mess with a Frenchman's pastry, be it a croissant, a madeleine, or a puy d'amour, like the ones that
absolutely
are about
not.
to be ready
Jesus.
to eat. So as soon as your pastry and preserves are ready, you can press down the inside of the pastry just a bit and then fill it with the preserves. Then I found another recipe from this same period which suggested topping it with a cherry dipped in syrup, so I did that just as a garnish.
Yum.
And here we are, Puy d'amour from 1840,
God,
a French pastry worth going to war over. Well, doesn't that just look pretty as a picture? Even though I didn't make the pastry on my own, it's still a finicky pastry to work with, so I'm actually quite pleased at how these turned out. Yeah, let's give it a taste.
God, that looks good.
So flaky.
Yeah, that's the magic about pastry, chat.
Recipe is really, really good. It is delicious. It's very sweet. Most of the older recipes from France around this time use a 1-to-1 ratio of fruit to sugar by weight. So a lot of jams use less sugar.
That's really good. Imagine that with a little bit whipped cream on top of the jam.
Really good.
Oh, that'd be awesome.
I have to say, the pastry to jam ratio here is good. It is a good amount of jam. Wouldn't want much more than that. And if you wanted to maybe use half jam and half pastry cream or chantilly cream, whipped cream, I think that would be a good thing. Yeah.
That'd be delicious.
Really good. I love those layers. It's good stuff. So make some French pastry, or just go buy some French pastry.
Genuinely, some. I believe the pastry cream variant on that would be really, really good. Like, genuinely. I think that'd be really fucking tasty. Holy.